If you enjoy our videos and podcasts and would like us to continue putting out regular quality content, head over to patreon.com/aircrew interview, where you can donate monthly, and in return you will get rewards ranging from early interview viewings, bonus clips, credited as a producer, and much more. Thank you and enjoy. So Todd, when did you first become interested in aviation?
Oh, wow. Well, you probably heard this before, but as long as I can remember, really. I'd say probably about age 5 or so. My father took me up in a light airplane, a Cessna, and from that point forward, I think I was hooked.
So what year did you actually join the US Air Force?
Yeah, I was commissioned in May of 1998 out of North Carolina State University through what we call the ROTC program, the Reserve Officer Training Program. Mm-hmm. And so 98.
And did you have a certain aircraft you wanted to go on to, or did you just want to be a part of the Air Force in general?
No, it's a great question, and I'm sure all your interviewees get asked this question. But no, I was probably the stereotypical want to go fighters. Mm-hmm. But I had grown up around an Air Force base that had C-130s at it, and I'd flown on C-130s as a cadet when I was in our version of the Air Cadets. And so it sounds funny to say, but I either wanted fighters or C-130s. No other multi-engine airplane. And I also, and you'll probably get into this later, I spent a year holding at a fighter base, at an F-16 base. And I actually was assigned to work in the F-16 simulator building there. So I got to fly the F-16 sim, and then I got several rides in the backseat of an F-16D model. So I was quite excited about fighters, but in the back of my mind, I also thought, I'd love to go C-130s because I knew that they did a lot of different missions. I'd been on a lot of different missions already with them as a cadet. And my father had a friend who flew C-130s, and so I'd been around C-130s a lot too as well. So, so long story short, yes, probably my first choice was fighters, but second choice was to go Hercs.
So, yeah, you mentioned there, like, the F-16, before we move on, like, you mentioned the F-16 simulator. How did that come about? That was, seems like a very odd position to get.
Yeah, well, much like the Royal Air Force, when you're waiting to go to pilot training, or UPT as we call it in the U.S. Air Force, at the time, it tends to change. So every year is a bit different. Some years people go straight to flying training. Some years you have to wait. And in my year, in 98, we had to wait. And I had to wait 11 months after I got commissioned. And they basically farm out all these brand new second lieutenants to various bases, and they try to put you in a flying squadron or attached to the flying squadrons, doing admin type jobs, like scheduler was a common one that they put these brand new lieutenants in. And I was actually sent to the OSS squadron at Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, the 20th OSS, and which is the Operations Support Squadron. At first, I was a bit bummed at that because my other friends were put in the different fighter squadrons, the 4 fighter squadrons there at the time. And but then I learned that it was actually quite lucky because being in the OSS, I was then assigned to the simulator building to help the simulator staff. And so they taught me how to work the simulator, and I could get in the simulator whenever it was free. And then on top of that, I could fly with any one of the 4 squadrons. Wow. So, and all my friends were the schedulers at the 4 squadrons as well. So that helped as well. And my boss was a pilot in the 79th Fighter Squadron, and I flew with them quite a bit, but I could also fly with the other squadrons. So I ended up flying several times in the backseat of the F-16.
And what was that like to fly in the back? I mean, it must have been like a rocket ship.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Prior to that, I'd only been in propeller-type airplanes. I did get a T-37 tweet ride when I was in ROTC in college in a little twin-jet aerobatic trainer, which is what I eventually trained on. But most of the time I'd been in Cessnas or Hercules. So being in the F-16, pulling out on the runway, and when it pushes up the throttle and lights the afterburner and it pushes me back in the seat and we start going, it was an experience. And I will freely admit the only time I have been airsick in my entire life was my very first F-16 ride.
Oh, really?
And it was middle of summer, so it was really hot in South Carolina. And it was what they call an SAT ride, surface attack training. And it was out to the range to drop bombs, basically, to do practice bombs. And they did 12 passes on the range with me in the back seat sweating because I had not learned the trick of hydrating quite a bit before that as well. I'd probably had some dodgy Taco Bell or something, some kind of fast food before it. And I was dehydrated and I got sick. And that was the only time in, however many years, 30 years of being in airplanes that I got airsick. But after that, I learned to hydrate and, never had a problem then. And so it was a kick in the pants, as they literally say, to fly in the back seat. And things happened really fast.
Awesome. But let's go into your Herc training. You went on to the T-44. What was that like to train on?
Yeah, well, first, much like anyone going through in the U.S. Air Force flying training program, I started on the T-37, the Tweet, which sadly, again, showing my age, is retired now. But I flew for 6 months on the T-37 during the primary phase of flying training. Prior to that, I got my pilot's license on a Cessna 152, courtesy of the Air Force, which was, again, nice. But then did T-37s for primary. I got about 100 hours on the Tweet. And in the Tweet, you learn the basics of airmanship, U.S. Air Force regulations, aerobatics, formation training, instruments, and then you graduate from that. And then you get what the RAF would call streamed. We call it track select. I think they still call it that. It might have changed that name as well. And you either get track selected to fighters, to heavies, helicopters, or at the time, they had a special program with the T-44, which was just specifically C-130 Hercules.
Okay.
And so on my dream sheet, as we call it, I put fighters first. I put T-44s, that C-130 option, second. And in my class, I think there was 17 of us that graduated. And of the guys who were not already destined for Air National Guard, who have a guaranteed fighter slot, I think there was 4 fighter slots, and I think I was number 5 in the ranking, or number 6, so I was just 1 or 2 behind that. Wow. But I did get my second choice, which was T-44s. And as you just asked about the T-44, I sent you a couple of pictures of that. We can show that later. I don't think I have a model of one around, but it's an orange and white twin-engine King Air, basically, with the Navy. And it was down at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi in Texas. And it was 6 months, again, of learning basic flying training, except in a multi-engine environment. A lot of formation training, instrument training, a lot of single engine work, learning how to deal with prop engines when you have 2 engines and lose one on one side. Okay. So a lot of single engine training. That was quite tiring for your whichever leg you were using at the time, holding that rudder in. But it was a fantastic program, and it was a joint service program. So it was run by the Navy. It was a Navy squadron. We had a Navy skipper, and we had Air Force students. We had Air Force instructors. We had Navy instructors, Navy students. You had Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and even foreign students. So we even had Italian students going through with us at the time.
Wow, okay.
And it was a fantastic program. There were 2 squadrons, VT-31, VT-35. I was in VT-31. On the King Air, it was a Beech 90. For those that are familiar with the King Air, it was the older type King Air, is a smaller one, and it was fantastic. It was great fun, really was. And the Navy operates under, as many of your Navy interviewees will say, a different set of rules than the U.S. Air Force. The old joke is that the Air Force tells you what you can do in the rule book, and the Navy rule is if it's not in the rule book, you can do it.
That's great.
And I always use the example in one of our naval manuals that we had to use. It said you cannot shoot at wildlife from a moving aircraft. And I thought somebody's had to do that for that to be put in the rule book. But
very true.
But the Navy training was interesting because they treat everything like a boat, or I should say a ship. I like to throw a little jab at the Navy guys. I say in a boat all the time. They treat it like the ship. So we landed on the deck. If you had to go around, like in the Air Force, we would have said there's an airplane on the runway, go around. In the Navy, it was foul deck, wave off. So, and instead of turning base at the perch in the Air Force, you had to turn at the 180 point because you're turning 180 degrees back the other way. So, it was all very Navy. So it was an interesting experience. But it was in Corpus Christi, Texas, on the beach. So I couldn't complain. I did T-37s at primary at Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma, which is a nice place, but there really isn't much out there. But Corpus Christi, Texas was nice. It was on the beach. And the Navy, other mentality of the Navy was if you weren't training or weren't on the flying schedule, you could go do whatever you wanted. Theoretically, it was study, or it could be lay out on the beach. The Air Force mentality was, if you're not flying, then you're in the flight room studying.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, it was a very different atmosphere. Definitely a culture shock. But anyway, so yeah, did T-44s. I think I got about 115 hours in the T-44. The T-44s are still going right now. They still use them down at Corpus Christi, but sadly they closed the Air Force portion of the program in 2012. Mm-hmm. And I graduated from T-44s in August of 2000. So the Air Force made a decision that all Hercules training could continue with just the normal T-1 Jayhawk multi-engine training at all the normal UPT bases.
Yeah, so let's move on to the Herc, because that's why we're here to talk about the mighty Herc. And What were your first thoughts about the Hercules? Did you think it was... I mean, every time I see it, I just think magnificent as soon as I see it. How did you feel like when you saw it?
Yeah, I had that same impression, but also I had the probably the obvious one. Wow, this is a large airplane.
It's huge.
Yeah. It's only when you park it next to a C-5 or a C-17 that you feel like you're smaller. But when you walk out on the ramp at Little Rock, and at the time in 2000, when I went through the schoolhouse at Little Rock, the OCU is there for the British term. Mm-hmm. We call it an FTU, the Flying Training Unit. Yeah. The FTU there at Little Rock, along with all the operational squadrons, there was almost 100 C-130s on the pan.
Wow.
At the time. And so you'd walk out there, and I think there was 26 rows of C-130s.
No way.
So you walked out. It was quite a overwhelming experience, I would say. But they prepare you really well. I mean, much like any OCU or FTU, you do a lot of ground school. I think it was 5 or 6 weeks of ground school. You do several simulator rides, and then you head down to the actual flying squadron, the training squadron, and then it starts from there. And while you're flying, you're still going up and doing simulator training as well. I went through an older system there. They don't do it this way anymore. Again, makes me feel older. But first off, the old program was the very traditional way of you trained as a co-pilot first in the right seat. And the FTU was about 5 to 6 months long. And I forget how many. I think we got about 60 hours in the right seat. But you did everything though. It's a different mentality to the Royal Air Force. In the U.S. Air Force, every pilot is trained at the same level in the very beginning. So we did airdrop, we did formation, we did you did co-pilot duties for assault landings, the short field landings. You did medevac. You did all the different missions. It wasn't just carry cargo from point A to point B.
Okay, so it was kind of like a multi-missions training system.
Yeah, and you would graduate as a fully qualified co-pilot on night vision goggles, formation, airdrop, night qualified, assault landing qualified as a co-pilot, not actually doing the landing, but monitoring. You would get all that qualification. So when you theoretically showed up at your squadron, there was very little. I mean, you did have to go through a combat ready upgrade, but that usually only consisted of 2 to 3 flights once you got to the squadron.
Right. Okay.
Your operational squadron. So the idea was that you put out a finished product, basically. And so you come out as a co-pilot, and then you spend a year and a half to 2.5 years as a co-pilot, and then you go back to Little Rock, to the schoolhouse again, to go to aircraft commander school, which is, we call it a captain of an airplane. We call it an aircraft commander.
Yeah.
And so you do that, and that was a 4-month course back at Little Rock. Now the program has changed. Now they do like the airlines, unfortunately, in my opinion, but it seems to work, so I guess it's just my opinion. But they do a new program now where they call it the First Pilot Program, and they do the majority of their training in the left seat, which is typically the aircraft commander seat. They do some training in the right seat, so they're familiar with co-pilot duties, but they train them mostly in the left seat. Mm-hmm. And that allows them to taxi the airplane, because in the C-130, there is a tiller wheel over on the left side of the cockpit, just in front of the aircraft commander's left knee. And that's the only way to turn the nose wheel on the ground. So when you're sitting in the right seat, you can't really taxi the airplane. You could sort of taxi it using differential power, but that's not exactly very precise.
Yeah. And
by the regulation, the guy on the left seat should taxi it with the wheel. So they train them in the left seat primarily, and then give them some co-pilot duties. And then when they get to their squadron, they can fly in the left seat, but they have to fly with either an instructor or I think an experienced aircraft commander in the right seat. And then they upgrade eventually. They do a top-up program where then they certify him as an aircraft commander. it seems to work, so I can't really bash the system, but much like many things, I'm very old school, and I thought the old way was just fine. But at some point, I think they've decided that it's cheaper this way and maybe more efficient. So
yeah, I think money probably comes into it a lot, and especially these days with flying systems.
And then went to Little Rock, and then, like I said, 6 months at Little Rock, doing everything. You start off with the basics. Just this is how to fly the airplane. You do a lot of instrument flying, and then progress up to formation flying. I should say single ship, low level, daytime flying first, to airdrop, and then to formation, daytime, airdrop, then to nighttime, single ship, low level, then to nighttime, formation, airdrop, and then you do something we call ski, which is station keeping equipment, which is flying in formation in the weather without seeing each other.
Oh my God.
It's an interesting capability, and the J model has it as well and does it very well now. But in the E&H model, it was an interesting system. It was taken, believe it or not, off of ships, which tells you how slow. People always joke about how slow the Hercules is. Well, it was slow enough that they took something off a ship and put it on the airplane, and it works fine. And basically, it sends out a signal. There's a master airplane. It has a master clock going. And each airplane has a couple boxes, one on the right side for the co-pilot to enter your own position, your number, the leader's number, who the master is. And then there's a box up on top of the main dash of the instrument panel that has all the buttons. If you're the formation lead or the element lead, then you have to echo or send out the commands that go back to the other airplanes. And then it's all based on timing. Based on keeping the correct position in the formation, you will turn at a certain amount of time after the leader in front of you is turned. If I remember correctly, it was something like 18 seconds for number 2 and 36 seconds for number 3 when we used to fly 3-ship formations. And you'd have elements of 3 airplanes. And you could, I think the maximum, and don't quote me on this, but the maximum I think was 32 airplanes you could put in one formation in the weather, at night possibly, not seeing each other. And they would fly, the number 2 would be 4,000 feet. Was it 4,000? I think it was 4,000 feet back was number 2 and 8,000 feet back for the number 3 from the lead. So it was about 4,000 feet of separation front and back, and then 500 feet to the right, 500 feet to the left for the number 2 and number 3 respectively. I think the largest I ever flew in was an 18-ship formation on the ski in the weather in Germany. And it's an interesting experience because you have a scope as well. And on the scope, you can see these little circles of dots. And each set of circles of dots represents an airplane. And so you're watching those, and you can see the formation. Well, you can see part of the formation, and you can see when your leader's turning on it. And then you've also got your regular instruments turning the bank steering bar and the on the attitude indicator, all of that, and you had a range meter, and it would show whether you were gaining or slowing down. Like if you were getting too close to the guy in front of you or getting too far back, it would show whether you were left or right of where you should be based on what you'd said in the panel on the co-pilot side. And then you could drop on it as well. So the lead would send back when he was dropping, and then you would drop based on timing off of when lead dropped. And he'd see the commands come across and then hack a watch. The navigator would hack a watch and then call it off the timing. The box would time it as well.
So I'm going to ask you, there's probably not too many of these, but the strengths and weaknesses of the Hercules, I mean, there's probably not too many weaknesses apart from it's a bit slow, but apart from that, I think it's probably perfect.
I'll start with the weaknesses, I guess, just because there's a lot less of those than there are strengths. The weaknesses, well, the big one, like you just said right there, it is slow. We would typically do a low level at 210 knots, up to about 230 knots, depending on whether you're trying to make up time or not. You can go, I mean, it depends on a lot of things, the weight, the temperature, the air pressure, all of that, but you can go up to about 250 knots, low level. And you can even go a little faster if you want. It just depends, again, on how heavy you are and temperature and that kind of thing. But also you increase your burn rate on the fuel and everything. But typically somewhere between 210 and 230 indicated airspeed. There's certain bits of cargo that we can't carry. We're fairly versatile with carrying different kinds of cargo, but certain bits of cargo wouldn't fit. For example, a Stryker vehicle, if you know what a Stryker is, it's a U.S. Army all-terrain. kind of APC six-wheeled vehicle. It'll fit in the back of a Herc, but not with the side armor attached to it. So you have to take the side armor off. So you can carry certain smaller helicopters, and I've carried a Gazelle in the back, and they seem to fit fairly well, but you got to take the rotors off and that kind of thing. There is a height restriction coming over the ramp hinge, as we call it, in the back, where the ramp is basically the tightest spot to get through, which is where the end of the ramp, where it attaches to the airplane, and the ceiling of the airplane. And it's about 9 feet and a couple inches maybe, but around 9 feet. And that's the clearance you have to try to get something through. So, I mean, strengths, I could go on for too long probably, but a few highlights are it's extremely versatile. You can do so many different missions with it. There's umpteen number of mission variants of it, probably about 15 to 20 variants of it. You can do anything from medevac to special ops to gunship to airborne command and control to airlift, airdrop, you name it. There's just so much. That's one of the things that really attracted me to it too, is that it was such a variety of missions. If you're no offense to the bomber guys, but if you're a bomber guy, you drop bombs. That's what you do. You always drop bombs. If you're an F-15C guy, you're a fighter guy, great, but that's what you do. You just do that all the time, and you're good at it. But the Hercules, we could do 10, 12 different roles. And that's just in the slick C-130, as we call it, the regular C-130. But other strengths, it's extremely survivable as far as battle damage, damage to the airplane in general, redundancy. There's 3 hydraulic systems on the airplane. It's extremely, I won't say, it's easy to fly. I'll say it's easy to fly. It's easy to fly. It's difficult to fly well, as a lot of pilots will say about the planes. But it's a very forgiving airplane. It's actually very maneuverable for a large airplane. You don't get to see the maneuverability of the Hercules very well unless you see a demo. The Blue Angels put on a little demo with their Fat Albert Herc, or they used to. Now they're going to have the new J model, the RAF one that they've got. So, but the maneuverability of it is really, really impressive. It is eye-watering, especially when you're doing it. Without going into too much detail, I mean, we practice fighter evasion, that kind of thing, and I went to a course called the Advanced Airlift Tactics course, where you have F-16s try to jump you and turn with you quite a bit, and you can actually survive quite a long time, theoretically, till they get tired of trying to mess with you, or until you have other escorting fighters show up and push them off. But but yeah, with the right aids like a cupola or a cupola, as we'd say in America, but the bubble, we call it the bubble. It's a glass bubble you put up on the top in the forward escape hatch, and you put an extra crew member up there who looks behind the airplane and basically clears your tail for you when a fighter drops in on you.
Wow. Okay.
And calls the turns and that kind of thing. But it's incredibly survivable. I won't go into too much detail, but it has defensive aids on it, and the aids on it are extremely effective. Especially for such a large airplane. It can land. Another big strength of it is it can land and take off in very short spaces. We regularly would train on 3,000-foot strips, which a 3,000-foot strip, if you're familiar from flying a Cessna, most little private airfields are normally about 4,000 to 5,000 feet long for a Cessna. And we would land on a 3,000-foot strip, and we would have to land in a 500-foot box.
Wow.
So the wheel, you have to touch down in that 500-foot box. If you don't, you have to go around. So you're aiming for this box. And if you really jump on the brakes hard and go full reverse and everything, you can stop the airplane extremely quick, which I would have to test when I used to do a functional check flight to check to make sure the anti-skid was working. But you can stop the aircraft extremely quick. But yeah, I could go on about strengths, but those are the main ones, I would say.
But we're going to move on here, Todd, because we obviously you're UK based now, so you got a tour with the RAF or an exchange program. Can you tell us about this and how it came about?
Yeah, no, it was it's very interesting. The story goes way back actually to about 2002, I think it was. I was in Germany on that first tour that I was mentioning earlier at Ramstein. And we used to come across RAF Lynham for an exercise once a year, and I got to go do that exercise twice. And I talked to the exchange guy who was there at the time, the U.S. Air Force exchange pilot, who was on 47 Squadron. And he told me, he said, man, this is a great deal. If you ever get an opportunity, jump on it. And we really enjoyed our time at Lynham during the exercise as it was. We spent we stayed down in Swindon, which we always joke about, and every time I say it to a Brit, they laugh and they go, "You really enjoyed Swindon?" Yes, we did.
Yeah.
But sorry for anyone who lives in Swindon. I actually like Swindon. I was all right with it. My wife, on the other hand, who's British, she would she wouldn't agree with me.
Yeah,
but
I agree with them.
Yeah, but no, it was really good. So I talked to him, and then I went to my next base, which was near my hometown as well, called Pope Air Force Base in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to go back there anyways. My parents still live there, and I still had a lot of friends there. And unfortunately, my father was very sick at the time as well, and so I asked to definitely be assigned there, and the assignment guy laughed at me because no one wanted to go to that base most of the time. So he's like, "I can definitely send you there." So I did, and it was good that I went because my father passed away about 6 months after I got there. So, but I got to spend those 6 months with him as well, and that was good. Okay. And look after my mother, who's still there.
Yeah.
But from that perspective as well, the squadron I was in was a great squadron. It was a 2nd Airlift Squadron, and I deployed a lot with them. I did 4 deployments with them to Kuwait for Operation Iraqi Freedom. I'd done missions over in Bosnia, when I was in Germany at Ramstein as well. But flying in Iraq with the 2nd Airlift Squadron was a phenomenal experience, and it was. We can talk more about that later. But flying in combat with the C-130 was really memorable.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so towards the end of that tour, I was on my last deployment there in Kuwait, and I got a call from the boss, and he said, "Hey, I think you'd mentioned an interest in the British Exchange. Well, the opportunity has come up." He said, "I've got 2 assignments that you can choose from. Either you could go to the RAF Exchange flying C-130Js, which I was on an E model at the time, which is a world of difference, basically a completely different airplane.
Yeah.
And or you can go to Scott Air Force Base and fly C-40s, which are the 737 VIP jets."
Yeah.
And he said to me, he said, "Todd, now one of these is really good for your career, and one of them is going to be a lot of fun." And he was steering me towards the career one because he wanted me to do the right career choices. And I looked him straight in the eye and I said, "Sir, I hear you and I understand that, but I'm going to do what's good for my family and have fun." Exactly. So I'm going to take the British Exchange. So I agreed to it, but then quickly realized that as soon as I got home from that deployment, 2 weeks later, I needed to go back to Little Rock again.
Oh, wow.
to go to the FTU and do a 4-month conversion course on the C-130J.
Really?
And the C-130J is a phenomenal airplane. It looks like a Herc, does a lot of the same stuff as a Herc, but the old joke to us when we first showed up there was, don't think this is another Herc, because it was an entirely different concept to fly it. Because it doesn't have a navigator, it doesn't have a flight engineer. Most of that is automated or now done by the pilots and the loadmaster. So theoretically, the basic crew on the J is only 2 pilots and 1 loadmaster. Wow. And but you've got a heads-up display. You've got your head-down displays that display your engine instruments, your navigation, the radar, all of that. And you got the big heads-up display, which is phenomenal. It's one of the, I think, it might be the biggest heads-up display in the Air Force. And the power, different engines. You had the AE 2100s, the Rolls-Royce engines with the Dowdy props on them, the composite props, with the 6-bladed props versus the old 4-bladed props. And the power difference was absolutely phenomenal. You asked me about the F-16 the first time what it was like in that. First time I was in a J model, it absolutely blew my mind away because in an older Herc, you'd run up the power, you'd let go of the brakes, and it would start to roll, start to pick up some more speed, and eventually get going. In the J, it was throw up the power, and it pushed me back in the seat. And all my checklists that I had up on the shelf, there's actually a shelf in the J as well, next to you. All of that went flying back behind me as well, and I thought, "You've got to be kidding me!" And it could climb out like a banshee, I would say. I mean, it just really could climb out incredibly. And it was a different mindset as well. The checklist was run differently. The crew coordination was run differently. Mm-hmm. And I tell everyone, I very much enjoyed my time on the J. But I found that I also had to work harder on the J, even though I had a heads-up display and moving map display and everything glass. I didn't have those 2 other brains and those 2 other sets of eyes and those 2 other sets of hands. Mm-hmm. So I found that it was much busier as a J pilot than it was as an E&H pilot. I jokingly always say that in the E&H, all I had to do was drive the bus. But in the J, you had to do everything. Mm-hmm. So back to the RAF Exchange. So I did the conversion course. No issues on the conversion course. Had a great time. Most of the instructors were old buddies of mine that had flown the other models with me before. And it wasn't many flights either. I think I got 6 flights in the J.
Wow. Okay.
And then they sent me over to the RAF on the exchange. And there was a bit of confusion and a bit of a challenge at the beginning, was that I was going to be the first USAF J exchange pilot. All the previous exchange pilots have been for the E&H and gone to the K model C-130, which, for those who don't know, the C-130K is kind of what we'd call in the U.S. Air Force a Super E. It's got the H model engines, but the E model fuselage.
Right.
And so I was going to be the first J guy. And there weren't many J guys at the time that had a lot of experience, other than the guys on the OCU and the U.S. Air Force. So I got there, and the RAF had expected that I was a very experienced J model pilot. And I said, no, I'm a very experienced C-130 pilot, but not a very experienced C-130J pilot. So they said, that's fine. We were going to put you through the second half of the captain's course anyways, just to get you used to RAF procedures and checklist and all the differences and how it's done here. And I am so glad they did, because it was massively different.
Yeah.
The checklist was done completely different. And then one of the biggest things that threw me, and I laugh every time I say this or think about it, is I had to then learn the metric system a bit better.
Oh, yeah.
Because the RAF had just recently, before I got there, changed over to doing all the weights and all the measurements in metric for the Hercules.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, the airplane was designed by Lockheed in America, so all the numbers in the Imperial system were much easier to remember, because they were all based on zeros and fives. So it was 500 to 1,000 pounds between the inboard and outboard tanks on fuel. Well, now became liters, kilograms, and tons. And to say that was a bit of a challenge is an understatement. And before I got there, they told me that even the RAF guys had to put little stickers up by the fuel gauges.
No way.
To help them with the conversion. And so I did struggle with that. And the airplane now, instead of looking at the gross weight of the airplane, I was looking at the all-up mass of the airplane. So instead of remembering things like 175,000 pounds was the wartime gross weight restriction and 155,000 pounds was the peacetime gross weight restriction, it was now, I can't even remember what it was in the RAF now. I think it was 62 tons or 62.4 tons. And 70.1 tons or 70.3 tons, something. I know those aren't the right numbers, but around those. Yeah. And so having to do all the metric conversion was interesting. But that being said, the course was phenomenal. The instruction I got from the RAF was incredible. I got to do quite a few simulator rides, quite a few flights in the airplane. And for the first time in the J, I'd only flown across the Atlantic in an E model once. Doing what you would call a frame change in the British parlance, back from the desert on an E model. I'd never done it other than that. And then I'd had a navigator and an engineer. Now in the OCU, we had to do so many route sectors. And so we had to do those. And we flew across the Atlantic a couple of times during the OCU, which was great experience. Interesting to see what effects icing has on a J model. Yeah. But yeah, it was a great experience. I was then assigned to 24 Squadron at RAF Lynham. And at the time, 24 Squadron ran the OCU and was an operational squadron. And so that was an interesting experience. I did the Airland MVG course, the Tier 3 course. Tier 4 course. And that allowed me to be then qualified to go out on operations. And so my first detachment was to Al Udeid for Optelic in support of operations in Iraq. And it was the first time I'd flown a J in combat, and it was quite a bit different than flying an E or H out in Iraq. An E model, in particular, struggles in the summertime. To climb out of Baghdad in broad daylight is a very surreal experience. You feel very exposed, and also it takes a little while to get up to altitude. In the J model, it was a lot quicker to get up to altitude. But also being as fast as it was and not having external tanks, it's also a lot harder to slow it down. So you'd be coming in on a high-speed approach and trying to slow down at the same points you used to in an E model and go, wow, I need to slow down sooner. But I will never forget the first time we went into Baghdad in the J with the RAF. I flew into a sandstorm on the approach into there, and the visibility was down to minimums, and we landed on, and the tower couldn't even see us. and the tower had to ask where we were on the runway to give us taxi instructions.
Really?
And we taxied over, and it was the sun had just set. And I remember the British the intel officer, coming out to give us the latest update. Always get an update from the intel officer, see if anything's changed on threats around the airfield. And he said, "Gents, I just have one thing for you, and that is Michael Jackson has just died." And it was the night that Michael Jackson had died back in America.
Right.
And I thought, wow. And to be honest, we all kind of sat there for a minute and thought, wow, Michael Jackson just died. Yeah, I mean, it was, but that was the first time in Iraq in an RAF JMO. But so I did that detachment at IUD. It was a different experience to be with the RAF as a USAF member at a U.S. Air Force base, the IUD there, and not having to follow all the U.S. Air Force rules, which was quite refreshing.
Yeah.